Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. Hi, this is Bill. I thought this interview was so good, I wanted you to hear it again. So enjoy. And a warm welcome to the afternoon show. I am Bill Arnold, and today I'm so glad to be welcoming back into the studio Dr. Glenn Pickering. He's written a number of books. One of his favorite books of mine is on the game of tag. What'd you say, Bill? Yeah, it's on the game of tag, which you all played as a kid. Glenn started off in life as an engineer, and then he went and became a pastor. And then he also went on and got his PhD in psychology. So he's an interesting man with some very, very interesting perspectives. So we're going to talk today about his book about tag. Glenn, welcome back.
Thanks. Always good to be here.
Okay, let's get first of all, the 30,000-foot view of what the game of tag is.
Well, I'm going to get to that in just a second, if that's okay.
Well, yeah, you're the guest. You can
I know,
do what
that's
you want.
right. It's my show. I can do whatever.
Well,
okay,
it's actually my show, but
I
you
know,
can
I
do
know.
what you want.
Technically, it says Bill Arnold on the top. But
yeah, you're the guest.
So I'm going to talk about the game of tag, where we get stuck in that game where we're trying not to be the bad one and we make somebody else the bad one instead, just like in the little kid game of tag. But first I want to kind of set us up for that conversation by saying this. I had a Christian client meeting him for the first time at one of our counseling sessions. We started off in this real intense way. And he said, Glenn, do you believe that Jesus was both fully human and fully divine? And I was a little taken back by his intensity. I get that for some people, that's sort of a test question. And I said, well, yeah, of course he was. And they said, but aren't you? He looked at me like I maybe said something sacrilegious, but of course I wasn't trying to be silly or sacrilegious. We both have that reality. I mean, we all have that dual reality. There's a part of us that's totally spiritual, that's connected to God. When we're praying to God, our spirit is connected to God's spirit, and that lives after this world. Mm-hmm. And that spirit's walking around in a human body on earth. Mm-hmm. And those are both true, which is both beautiful and hard. So let me talk about the beautiful part, and then we're going to talk about the hard part, which is where the game of tag comes in. Now, it's beautiful for this reason. Well, I'll give a couple of simple examples. Let's say I'm walking in the woods or the valley, looking at a mountain or looking over a beautiful valley or who knows what, a lake, could be anything that's my human self can look at and think, wow, that's amazing. That's so beautiful. That's like breathtaking. And my spirit also, at the same time that my human self can think, wow, that's really beautiful, that's so amazing, my spirit self can be worshiping the God who created that beauty. Mm-hmm. And my spirit self and my physical self are lined up, and that's an amazing experience. And when people say, oh, it was life-changing, it was so amazing, that's what they mean. Something happened where my physical self and my spiritual self were both involved in a really powerful, positive sort of way. Same thing happened to me the other day. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter who I adore, and a 2-year-old grandson who is amazing. So I come in the door, and my little granddaughter runs down the hall, jumps in my arms, and says, Grandpa, Grandpa. And my little 2-year-old grandson comes running over, grabs me around the leg, and he's so happy to see me. I see my physical self is totally happy. I mean, I feel cared for, I feel loved, just the physical touch is really great. And my spiritual self is so grateful for those two miraculous gifts. I mean, they bless my life in ways that are beyond words. And I couldn't have earned that. I couldn't have made that. I couldn't have made that happen. It is literally a miracle, a gift that was just given to me. And my spirit is so grateful. So there are times when our spirit and our human self line up in ways that are really cool. But there are times when they don't line up. So, for example, let's say somebody comes up to one of us and says, Glenn or Bill or whoever, Wyatt, I'm really upset with you about this, that, or the other thing. Maybe we made a mistake. Maybe they just misunderstood. It doesn't matter. But they're upset. And you can just sort of feel the intensity of their upsetness kind of wash over you. Now, our human self has a very specific reaction. This is where we're getting the game of tag. Well, I think I have to defend myself. I don't want to be the bad one. I don't want to be it. And I think I start backpedaling or defending myself or blaming the problem on somebody else. That adrenaline kicks in. I have that flight or fight sort of response, and that takes over my human self. My human self reacts in that very human way, defending, blaming, counterattacking, who knows what. Now, here's the problem with that knee-jerk human response. That always sets up a conversation that's me against you, which means that we will both walk away feeling isolated and misunderstood. We will literally be in wrong relationship. And Jesus says in Matthew 18, verse 15, if your brother has sinned against you, go tell your brother. And if he hears you, you've gained a brother. Now, it's really important to hear the impact of that. If my brother can put aside his sort of knee-jerk reaction and just listen, understand, and say, boy, I'm really sorry about that, Glenn. See, we are back in right relationship. I have gained my brother. We are back lined up with each other. And we're in right relationship, just as God says we should be. So my spiritual self knows that we're all in this together, and we need to be in right relationship with God and with one another. I mean, the great commandment couldn't be more clear. But my physical human self can really only think about itself. And so in those cases, the thing that people talk about as spiritual warfare just comes in a real sharp focus. I have a very intense human response, which is directly contradictory to sort of my best self, my spirit response. And there's that intense conflict in us. Now, that's what sets up the game of tag. When I don't want to be the bad one, I don't want to be it. So I actively defend myself or make somebody else the bad one, make somebody else it. Just like in a game of tag, you don't want to be it, so you tag somebody else and make them it. And that's where all human relationships that break down, that's exactly where they break down.
Mm-hmm. So in the game of tag, you don't have any teammates, do you?
Right. It's just
you're
yourself.
not in community.
Right.
You're
Exactly.
in isolation.
Exactly.
Trying not to be one of the ones that are the bad persons.
Right. I know.
Yeah.
Honestly, it even sounds childish when we say it out loud, but I promise you that's exactly what actually happens.
Yeah. You said this to me years ago, and it took me probably a few more years to figure it out. But you said something to this effect. It's not that you need to be right.
Okay.
You just want to be one of the ones that aren't wrong.
Right. Our ego self is so afraid to be wrong. We think that means there's something wrong with us, or that we're defective somehow, or we're less than just because we made a mistake or misunderstood something or did something wrong. And our ego self is really distracted by that and really upset about that. Now, our spiritual self, see, if somebody says, hey, Glenn, I got your bill and I think there's a mistake on it, my human self wants to think, no, I'm sure there's not. You probably messed up. Something foolish like that. But my spirit self says, oh, okay, what happened? Because I care about my brother and my sister, and if we made a mistake, I just want to get it right. Mm-hmm. But here's the interesting thing. One of those happens faster than the other one. That's the trick.
Yeah.
See, when I get triggered into playing a game of tag, where somebody's upset with me or critical, or there's a conflict of any sort, it triggers adrenaline in us, that sort of flight or fight thing. And that adrenaline takes 25 milliseconds to get released into our body. 25 milliseconds. Forming even a beginning thought, like, oh, I'm sure they didn't mean that. They're probably just trying to get it right. I should listen carefully to my brother. That takes 250 milliseconds. That's the fastest we can organize the thought, which means that knee-jerk reaction will always kick in 10 times faster than my spiritual self can come up with an actual, real, this is what I actually think about that. I love my brother. I love my sister. If we made a mistake, I just want to get it right. But see, that thought takes anywhere from a quarter of a second to a second to actually generate. And the adrenaline that comes in from somebody thinking I did something wrong only takes 25 milliseconds, which makes sense to me because flight or fight is what kept our species alive. So if I'm being chased by a wild animal, I don't want to think about it for several seconds and then do something. I need to go right now. And so go ahead. I'm sorry.
So Glenn, the first thing we're going to do is battle our own hardwiring.
Yes, right. We are literally wired to think we need to protect ourselves, which in certain situations we do. But nowhere near the number of times where we actually play tag. Like once in a while, somebody actually is physically attacking me, and of course I have to do something. Yeah. But most of the time when we get triggered into playing tag, when the adrenaline kicks in, it's just because somebody is upset with us or disagrees with us or misunderstood something we said. It's like, but that hardwiring kicks in, and this is what it's important to understand. Sometimes people think, well, Glenn, once I'm more mature, I won't have that thought, or my good thought will come first. I think your right thought will never come first. Never.
Yeah.
The flight or fight thing takes 25 milliseconds.
Wow.
Even the simplest thought, like, oh, wow, it's really hot out here, it takes 250 milliseconds to form that thought and say it out loud to myself. So I literally cannot respond faster than that adrenaline kicks in my body.
So if we're able to do this better, instead of reacting, we'll respond.
Right.
And that's where the work is.
That's exactly where the work is. I love it. That's a perfect summary, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's get to the work, because that's where I think we can all benefit. Because when you look at these intense knee-jerk responses, you talk about either you're going to shut down and you're going to have this disassociation, or you're going to be sullen, or you're going to be resentful, or you might get loud and start attacking.
Right, because in the game of tag, we play it one of two ways. We either play it what I call active tag or passive tag. So if I say to somebody, I think you made a mistake over there, and they immediately jump on my case, talk about how I messed it up, I'm so stupid, I'll never get it right. I know I'm talking to somebody who plays tag loud, what I call active tag. If I talk to somebody about a mistake and they sort of shut down or withdraw, it just feels to me like they're not even in the room with me anymore. I know that I'm talking to a person who plays passive tag. And one of the things I see in relationships is there's almost always one of each. So Gwen, for example, my wife was raised in a family that played active tag. You know, they're loud. They would say things you probably shouldn't say, and then bolt out of the house, and jump in the car, peel down the road, and leave rubber down the road. Come back 2 hours later like nothing happened. My family, on the other hand, dealt with anger by pretending we didn't have any. Not real helpful. Now, it took me a long time, and this is where we'll talk more about the 50-50 rule when we come back from break. But right now I just want to say this. It took me a long time to understand. So when I would start having an argument, she would get loud, I would shut down because I felt attacked. She would get more loud because she felt abandoned because I was literally not with her anymore, which made her get more loud, which made me feel more attacked, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, the whole thing would break down. We might go for 2 days and hardly talk. And the whole time I was walking around for those 2 days, I'd say to myself, well, it's too bad Gwen has such a, bad way of dealing with anger. And God convicted me once, and it's embarrassing to me. It took me like 8 or 10 years to figure this out, but God really just convicted me one day. We both had exactly the same degree of difficulty with anger. She would get loud, I would just shut down altogether. And those two things together is why we walked around for 2 days with nobody talking. Because she got louder and louder, and I just quit altogether and basically emotionally left the room. Well, guess what? That doesn't lead to resolution. So I really understand now that when I talk about the 50-50 rule, we really need to understand Tag thinks that one to know whose fault it was who had that argument. But see, my spiritual self knows, no, we both need to come with humility and ask, what was my half of how we had that argument? What did I do that made that conversation go so poorly? Really literally see the log in their own eye, not the speck in their eye. Because in that game of tag, I just want somebody else to be it, anybody else, just not me.
One line from your book, which I just have memorized, is, what is it about my behavior that contributed to our issue?
Right, perfect, exactly.
That's kind of a humble way of coming at it, isn't it?
Right, yes, it's exactly what Jesus was talking about. That he didn't say we should act like it's all my fault. Oh, I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I'm terrible. It's like, no. Jesus did say, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, you don't see the log in your own eye? In other words, take the log out of your own eye first. And mostly that's where people quit quoting that story, but that's not the end of the story. And then after that, Jesus says, so once you've taken the log out of your own eye, you have the right to talk to your brother or sister about the log in their, about the speck in their eye. So it's not that I'm supposed to blame them, and it's not that I'm supposed to act like it's all my fault. It's like I'm supposed to claim my half of whatever went wrong there, which hopefully then allows the other person to feel free enough and safe enough to say, well, I was part of that too, and I'm sorry for my part, because we both had a part in it. That will always be true.
Glenn, can you also be loud and shut down, where you say, fine, it was my fault, I'm a bad person, let's just call it a day?
That's a great example.
I mean, I don't want to talk.
Right.
I just want no conflict to be around anymore.
Right. And I want you to notice the effect of that. So if I say, well, fine, then just have it be your way and leave the room. See, basically I'm saying you're it, and then I'm leaving before you can take me back.
Right. Yes. Yes.
So I make you it without giving you any opportunity to explain yourself, talk it through, or reach resolution. Because for me, resolution is you're it and I'm leaving the room. That's resolution. Whose fault is it? Not mine.
Right. So the problems will continue at that point.
Yes, which means we're just going to have that same ugly conversation again probably tomorrow because we never actually finished the 10 a.
Yeah. And a lot of relationships have one argument their whole marriage. And that's the game of tag, isn't it?
Right. Yep. Sometimes people say, Glenn, we have hundreds of arguments every month. And I think, no, you have one or two arguments over and over and over again, and they don't get resolved, so you keep having them.
Yeah. They look different, but it's the same argument.
Right. The details are a little teeny bit different, but the fundamental argument is always the same. Mm-hmm. You're the bad one. No, you are.
Ooh. Dr. Glenn Pickering is my guest, talking about his book on tag. And if you want to learn more about Glenn, you can go to Dr. Glenn, that's with 2 N's, Glenn, Pickering, PICKERING.com, as we continue to talk about tag and how it works. If you have a question or a comment, you can text it over to 877-933-2484. And we'll be right back with Glenn. Hi, podcast listener. I'm Bill Arnold, and my theme song says, "What's for dinner?" And like when I'm grilling, I'm paying really close attention. And I know that ideal second to get the food off the grill. Like all good and ideal timings in life, right now would be an ideal time to be a cheerful giver to Faith Radio. Give now to support this podcast so that more people in more places might come to saving faith in Jesus and grow in their relationship and become a fully devoted follower. Click the link in the show notes or give now at myfaithradio.com. I'm back with Dr. Glenn Pickering, and we're talking about the game of tag. He's written a fascinating book on the game of tag, and it's really what we all have a tendency of doing. And we are in a position where we don't want to be it. We don't want to. The game of tag that you used to play on the playground is all you knew is you didn't want to be it, and if you were it, you had to give it to somebody else,
right,
to get yourself relieved from being it.
Right.
And Glenn, if we walk around on eggshells because we're afraid of having thoughtful interactions, because if I start a conversation with you, you're going to call it my fault, and I'm going to fire back, and then it's going to be, well, this is what you do, and you're going to say, yeah, but this is what you do, and all of a sudden we're going nowhere.
Right. And once again, just like we said before the break, you're having an argument you've probably had 100 times already.
Right.
Slightly different words, the exact same argument. And, the gospel always calls us not to a life that's a little different. The gospel always calls us to a life that's radically different. And so when Jesus said, well, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't see the log in your own eye? How about if you start with yourself? See, we think that's obvious, and in a way it is, of course. But it literally shifts every human interaction we'll ever have anytime there's a conflict or a misunderstanding or an argument of any sort. If each of us start thinking, okay, what was my part of how that thing got so off track? Instead of blaming the other person, suddenly, see, we're going to be having an actual real conversation, an intimate conversation where we're actually both going to learn something about ourselves and about the other one. And out of that will come a deeper and more profound understanding of one another. Or we just take turns blaming each other.
So interesting. Glenn, let's talk about in the game of tag,
right,
everyone is going to have a reaction and a response.
Right.
And I get the feeling if you're playing tag, both parties are going to walk away feeling hurt, confused, abused, or abandoned.
Right. Because think about this. Let's say Glenn gets really loud, so I feel like I'm being attacked. So I do the thing I used to do, just shut down altogether. I used to shut down so hard, I really would dissociate. It was almost like I wasn't even in the room. Which Gwen, of course, feels totally abandoned because she can tell I'm not there. I might be sitting there looking at her, but she can literally tell Gwen has left the building, which makes her feel abandoned. Like, here we are right in the middle of this important conversation, and you fundamentally checked out. Well, of course, then she's sitting there feeling that all by herself. And if I'm getting attacked or criticized in a way that feels harsh to me, so I shut down, of course, I feel like I'm by myself. And so now instead of that thing where the two become as one, We become two very different, very separate, very isolated people, and there's literally no upside to that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Glenn, I think you've talked before about, was it the 54-second rule?
52 seconds.
Is it 52 seconds?
Yep.
Because I'm thinking about this interaction where maybe one is loud and one is quiet, and both people are feeling hurt. They're not feeling heard or understood. And talk about the 52-second principle.
I love that rule. I actually understood that partly by working with churches where there's a conflict, and also partly just by working with my many clients over the years. That if we start playing tag, at that point we're both contributing something wrong to the conversation. We're both doing something that makes that conversation go so badly. But each of us has a shot at the beginning of doing something different. And we'll talk about how you do that, but here's the goal. If one of us is really upset and the other one is calm, just for that moment, I just know that within 52 seconds, we're both going to be at the same place. We're either both going to be worked up, or both going to be calm. One of those two things is going to happen. So the calm one is going to let themselves get triggered by the loud one and start defending or blaming back, and now we're both going to join at that place. Or the calm one's going to stay calm and loving and give the other person a chance to join them there.
Mm.
I was at a meeting with some people at a church where I was in conflict once a long time ago, and somebody got up and said, well, God, I'm so mad because blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, I see that. So the thing that really makes you mad is A and B. He looked a little shaken. He said, yeah, because I said, okay. And the reason that's so upsetting to you is because this and this reason, right? He looked at me and said, yeah, that's right. Sat down. See, if we cannot get triggered, which we're going to talk in a few minutes about how to do that, we can help the other person not be triggered. Or if we're triggered and the other person can stay not triggered for a few seconds, then we can also sort of come back from that game. Mm-hmm. But one of us has to not do it. Because the truth is, once that game starts, to say whose fault it is a crazy question, because we're literally both playing.
Glenn, isn't it critical the way in which a topic or an issue is brought up is critical to the direction that the conversation will go? Oh,
yeah. In fact, I was just talking to a client of mine today who her husband said something to her that she does that was irritating to him, which is true. But he said it in a way that felt condescending and harsh to her, which led to a bad conversation. Because I always think, sometimes we're so busy being right that even if we're telling the truth, it still comes across like we're trying to make the other person the bad one, and they will literally experience that. And they're not going to actually be able to hear any of the quote-unquote truth that we're telling, because all they're experiencing is the judgment, the condemnation, the condescendingness. And so I always think, unless I can talk to another person while remembering how precious they are to me, I'm not going to be able to be in that conversation very effectively.
Mm-hmm. So maybe talk about a safe environment, because if you're racing out the door and you've got a very busy day, and Gwen, your wife, says, oh, and another thing, Glenn, you were terribly judgmental about me last night, and you're already 5 minutes late. And you're going to feel like, whoa, what's going on? And it wasn't a safe environment, but she maybe couldn't help herself. And, it's talk about how important it is to create an environment where there can be respectful and kind and gracious and loving dialogue.
Right. Well, here's where it comes helpful to know that we're both human and divine. See, my human self is not capable of doing that. This is part of why, which, we'll talk more about the becoming a second responder in a little bit. But let's say Gwen or anybody else, doesn't matter. My cat pooped downstairs last night. I have a human reaction to that. Now, my spirit self, which will kick in about a half a second later if I give it a chance to, will remember, with God's help, that Gwen is incredibly precious to me, that we love our cat, or whatever it is that I'm all torqued out about at the second.
Right.
But that takes a little bit. And unless I'm going to sort of hold off on my knee-jerk reaction long enough to let that reaction show up, I will just end up being in a really bad conversation with pretty much everybody in my life, including my cat, who does seem to be pooping downstairs on the carpet.
Oh, boy.
I know that's not a fun thing, but, she's 20 years old, so.
So, Glenn, when you talk about the physical human reaction, the spiritual reaction, and we are best, are you saying we're best if we can keep those both at the center of our thoughts?
Yes, because
we can experience them as best as we can together.
Right, because here's the thing. Let me start here, because these passages are so helpful to me. When it says in James 3:9, it says, the tongue can be a fire. How is it, James asks in this really almost perplexed kind of way, that the same tongue that you use to praise God, you use to curse the precious child of that God?
Yeah.
What, this literally doesn't make any sense. And he's really getting at that sort of spiritual warfare thing that Paul's going to talk about too in a second, about how, yes, my spirit self knows God is amazing. I love all the children of my God. In fact, I'm literally commanded to love them as I love my own self. I know that perfectly, and I know it's right. And I know that's what makes me peaceful, and I know that's what makes me happy. And my little human self gets drawn into the dumbest stuff and starts saying things that will look, later on, you're going to look back and think, what was I thinking? You want to bang your head against the wall. So, James just pointing out, we have these two sides, and we need to be intentional about them. So, if I let the human one override the spiritual one, I will end up in relationships that are always tattered, and all of them will always end in exactly the same way. The name of the other person might be different, the circumstances might be a little different, but they're all going to end basically in the same way. Two people who are hurt, bitter, distrustful of each other, and think, I don't want to be with you anymore. Even though it might have been a great relationship if they figured this thing out.
Yeah. What about relationships with people that you know, love, care about, who aren't believers? So they're not going to really be able to respond on a spiritual level, or if they do respond on a spiritual level, it's not from a good place.
Right. Here's the really cool thing. We all have that spirit, and we would all choose to be peaceful and joyful if that's an option. Just that there are lots of people that don't get that they have that option. So oftentimes, if I can start a loving conversation with that person, they will actually respond in kind.
Nice.
Not because they necessarily would have done it themselves, but because they recognize that's what I want. Even if they haven't even heard the name of Jesus yet, there's still part of them that knows that's what I want. Peaceful, loving, caring. And that's when people start saying, well, God, how do you do that? And then I get to talk about how God is in my life and how important that is, and I get to do evangelism in a way that actually works. Instead of the way I got taught growing up, you grab somebody you've never met, force them to confess Christ, and pat yourself on the back for being a savior. I think, oh, golly.
Yeah.
See, really helping somebody means they come to you because they see that you have something they want. And then you get to tell them about how God has such a powerful impact on your life. And to an audience that actually wants them to know.
Yeah.
It's actually open to it.
There's a French philosopher whose name I can't pronounce, but he said, we are all spiritual beings having a human experience.
Right, for sure. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand those are both true. That we are all one.
Yeah.
And we're all our unique self. And those are both true. So all of us need some of the same things. We all want a clear sense of purpose. We all want to feel cared for. We all want to belong somewhere. We all want to use our gifts. And every one of us will find our own unique way to actually do that because we're crafted by God in our own unique individual human way. So the beauty of it is to understand then to say each of us is a child of God. We're one drop in the ocean of love. We all have that in common. And we all have a different purpose for being here. So when Paul says, you can't all be in the body of Christ. You can't all be the ears. You can't all be the eyes. We all have different parts of that body, and it's important that we play that part. So if we get that part right, we understand we have this really deep connection and these differences that are unique that make us who we are.
Dr. Glenn Pickering is my guest. You can learn more about Glenn at his website, drglennpickering.com. He's written several books, but the one we're chatting about today is called Tag Your It, the secret game that's destroying your marriage. We're going to take a little break, but if you want to ask Glenn a question about anything you've heard, you can text it over 877-933-2484. When we come back, I want to ask Glenn about where the game of tag started. And I think we can find that out in Genesis chapter 3. So we'll be right back.
It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold. Prime time, drive time. Let's get it started. Jump in your car. What's for dinner? It's the afternoon show with Bill Arnold.
We're talking about the game of tag today. I bet you played that as a kid right on the playground, and probably was a game that you didn't even like playing.
It's not really fun.
You had no teammates. You didn't really know when the game ended. All you knew is you didn't want to be the kid that was it, because everyone treated you like you were the untouchable, and no one wanted to be near you, and everyone avoided you, and you tried as hard as you could to touch some other kid to give them it, and then you weren't it anymore. And that is something that translates into how we communicate, unfortunately, and it's based on a book that Dr. Glenn Pickering, my guest, has written called Tag Your It, The Secret Game That's Destroying Your Marriage. And right before the break, I wanted to learn about where the game of tag originated, but then I was thinking, Glenn, before we get there, over the break, we were chatting about Romans chapter 7, verses 19 to 25. That might be even a better place to start because it will set up the Genesis verse.
Great. I love it. So here's what I think. We talk about spiritual warfare because we are this spiritual person walking around in a very human body, and those are both true. And coming to peace with our life is to come to peace with the fact that those are both true. So Paul talking in Romans 7 was just tormented. He felt like, is in anguish. It's like he's saying, the very things I want to do, I don't do. The very things I don't want to do is what I do. And I think, right. And see, he was tormented about it, but here's the trick of that. It's important to think, yep, that's right. See, there's no condemnation in Christ. And as soon as we start condemning ourselves, we've actually missed the point. We're just supposed to learn it. Yes, there are times when I get taken over by my human self and I don't actually do what my spirit self would want me to do, that even my human self later on is going to feel bad about doing. And there are going to be times when I know what the right thing to do is and I don't do it because I'm lazy or who knows what, I'm worried about what other people might think of me. And once again, my human self kind of gets in the way of my actual best, truest self. And instead of judging ourselves or condemning ourselves because there is no condemnation in Christ, or being in torment, it's important to just think, yes, that's right. That's all true. It just is true. I am a powerfully spiritual person walking around in a very human body on this earth in Minnesota in 2024. So I understand Paul's torment because he so wanted to always do the right thing. I mean, he was intense. He was intense about doing the right thing. But see, if we really understand this at the deepest level, that we are a deeply spiritual person walking around in a human body, and that those are both true, we understand we don't have to be in spiritual warfare about that. We can just understand that it's true. So, otherwise we get pulled into the game, and we think it even makes sense. So, we all play the game some of the time. We get pulled into getting defensive or blaming the other person or shutting down, all those things we talked about. And again, sometimes when people finally understand, oh, I've been playing tag. Oh, Glenn, you're a genius, which that part's true, of course. But basically what they're saying is I feel so bad about myself to find out I've been playing. And I want to say to them sort of the same thing. God doesn't want you to feel bad about it. God doesn't want you to judge yourself about it. There is no condemnation in Christ. God would love for you, though, to learn this, because then the thing that he wants for you is to be in a right relationship with him and other people will actually finally start happening. So it's a celebration if you get it, not a condemnation, if that makes any sense.
It
We're
does.
just supposed to think, oh, I get it. Okay. Well, now I've been given some of the tools to do that differently, and that's a godsend. That's a good thing. That's a blessing. So if you hear this for the first time and you're thinking, oh, my goodness, that's exactly what I've been doing, I want you to hear it clearly. Yeah, it might be true. With no judgment. Just sort of God showing you in a mirror a picture of yourself that might be helpful to you so you can choose to do it differently. Because God's not interested in condemning us. God is interested in sanctifying us. So God wants us to take those things we do right and learn from them, take those things we do wrong and learn from them. So we become more and more and more our best self, the self that God created us to be and that wants us to be. So just want to say to people, if you hear that, you've been playing the game, no judgment is necessary. Because the truth is, we're literally all tempted to play tag because we're human people walking around with a spirit. And sometimes people say that lead into that Genesis 3 passage you're talking about. Well, Glenn, it must be a social thing. We just live in a society that does that. And I think, oh no, Oh, no. This game has been going on as long as humans have existed. And if you read Genesis 3:12-13, where God says to Adam, "Why'd you eat the apple, man?" I love his response. Makes me laugh every time. "Well, the woman that you gave me told me I should eat the apple."
Tag.
In other words, God, it might be your fault. You might be the bad one, or she might be the bad one. But the one thing we know for sure is I'm not the bad one. It's one of you guys. It's not me. I'm not it. You are. So this game has been going on literally since we were created in human form. So that's why I say, please don't feel bad about it yourself. And please don't even feel bad that there's sort of those two halves of yourself. It's just true. You are a powerful spirit walking around in a human world. And those are both true. I can look at that beautiful forest and think, that's so beautiful. The sun shines off that. The trees are amazing. I can just smell the fresh cut grass. It's so beautiful. And honor the God who created all that. And when I do them both at the same time, life is actually its absolute peak. That's when it's the very best of the best. So it's not my job to condemn one of those. It's my job to embrace both of them and use them in a way that's most helpful. So we can talk about that in a second now, or we can come back to that after break. Kind of what you're thinking about that.
Well, I'm thinking if you really like the smell of fresh cut grass, you can come cut my lawn.
No, I say I like the smell. I don't say I like doing the work.
Okay. See, I'm not paying as close of attention as I should.
I like the outcome, not the process.
Yeah. I love that in Ephesians chapter 1, it talks about the incomparably great power, the very same power that raised Christ from the dead lives in us.
Right.
I'm thinking, boy, we are powerful spiritual beings.
Yeah, right. And so when Jesus said, John 10, I don't want you to live a small, teeny, little scared life. I want you to live a really big, abundant life. I want you to be your absolute best self. Well, I can't go around condemning myself for shutting down or being fearful and thinking somehow I'm living my best life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not.
Aren't those lies that are coming from the kingdom of darkness? I mean,
right.
The father of all lies.
See, that's why I love that whole Genesis thing. Adam and Eve were living in the garden. Everything was great. The relationship was great. The world was as it should be.
Yeah.
And then, see, the serpent convinced Eve and then Adam that really, actually, there was something fundamentally wrong with them.
And you don't have all you could have.
You don't even know the difference between good and evil, for crying out loud.
Right.
Very condescending. And because they believed that there was something wrong with them, see, then they ate the apple. But the same thing happens in the game of tag. If somebody comes up to me and says, Glenn, you made a mistake on my billing, and I think, well, that just means there's something wrong with me, then I'm going to get all defensive. I want to hide. I want to blame somebody else. But if I just think, oh, okay, because that doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It just means I made a mistake.
Yeah. And you're not a bad person. You just made a mistake.
I just made a mistake. I'm a perfect child of God who made a mistake.
Yeah.
When I see a little toddler learning how to walk, they fall down a lot. But we don't care. We think they're doing great. They climb up. They keep pulling themselves up. They keep giving it the best shot, and eventually they walk. And we don't think, but you fell down so many times. We think, great, way to go.
Yeah.
You did it.
We almost come up with expressions. Oh, did you fall down and go boom?
Yeah.
And we find that to be so cute.
Or like we're telling the kid to feel bad about themselves. And they think, no, this will happen.
Right.
Every single thing I do, everything I've ever written, there's a first draft. And there's a second draft. And there's a modification on the way to the studio draft. Right? Because that's supposed to be what happens. So as we keep learning, we keep getting better and better at what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think people get all caught up in the mistakes. And that's what I mean about the condemnation. That serpent wants me to think, hey, if you make a mistake on that, that just proves it. See, there's something wrong with you. You're messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And see, if I really believe that there's something wrong with me, something really messed up, what do I want to do? I want to hide myself.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody finds out. So what does Adam and Eve do? They put leaves on to hide themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this part of the story always makes me laugh. Then Adam goes to hide behind a tree. Like the God who created the entire known universe with a single thought won't know where he is.
Yeah.
That just kills me.
Yeah. Glenn, in the game of tag, what is frozen tag?
Frozen tag is sort of what I talk about, one of the ways in which we play what I call passive tag. Like, I come home from work and I kind of had a bad day. Maybe I made a couple mistakes. And Gwen said, hey, how's your day? Oh, fine. See, I don't actively make somebody else it. I'm just doing whatever I can to not be made tag in the first place.
Yeah. So it's not going to be my fault.
Not be my fault. So when I talk about the passive games where we shut down or we're quiet or we leave the room or we get all sullen, see, we're playing one of those versions of passive tag where I'm not actively making somebody else hit, but I'm just trying to make sure that I don't get tagged.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing happens in a meeting. You're there with 7 people. The leader says, hey, what do you guys think about this? Anything you want to add to that conversation? And nobody talks. I promise you, every single person in that room has an idea about the conversation you just heard. Why does nobody say anything? Because they're playing passive tag. They don't want to be wrong. They don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to be criticized. So I'm not making anybody else it. I'm just making sure I can't be it by what I don't do, by what I avoid doing.
Mm. All right, we'll take a little break. Come back. Lots more with Dr. Glenn Pickering. Go learn about him at drglennpickering.com. We'll continue our discussion on the game of tag when we return.
This is Susie Larson, host of Susie Larson Live. Maybe you have a loved one that you've been praying for years, and they still haven't trusted Jesus. Or maybe you have a loved one who once had a vibrant faith, but has since walked away. If this is true for you, know this: you're not alone. God sees you, He loves you, and He knows about the heartache you feel. And we care about it too. I've recorded 15 audio clips to encourage your soul. Text the word HEART to 877-933-2484.
Dr. Glenn Pickering is my guest. We're talking about the game of tag. I know you played it as a kid. If you just climbed in your car, he's written a book called Tag You're It, the secret game that's destroying your marriage. And if you've missed any of this hour, I do recommend hearing it from the start at myfaithradio.com, because you don't have to play tag. But if you're not going to play tag, it is going to require making a new decision. So, Glenn, talk about how I can not play this game of tag and how I can make a new or different decision.
Thank you. That's a great question. It says in James 1 about that we're supposed to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. And he says, for the anger of man doesn't do the righteousness of God. And I think, right, once I get pulled into that game and I get all worked up, I'm not doing godly things. I'm not saying godly things. I'm not leading us in a right relationship, for goodness sakes. I'm pretty much doing all the opposite of those things. So, if I want to not play tag, remember I said we have to just acknowledge, not condemn, but we have to acknowledge we have those two sides to ourselves. So if somebody says something to me like, Glenn, I think you made a mistake over here, and I can feel, remember, in just 25 milliseconds, it takes almost no time to feel that adrenaline rush kick in, and it makes me want to run or defend myself, which means I'm just going to play tag. I will always feel that reaction. Now the question is, okay, will I feel the reaction and then let that drive the thing I say? I'm going to take 1 or 2 prayerful seconds to ask God to help me come up with a better answer than that, and then say that. And it's important to understand that will always be my second response. That's what I mean before about the first response is so fast. My best response, my godly response, my spirit self response will never be my first thought because that other one happens so fast. I mean, it happens literally faster than thought. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be, it's always going to be my first thought. It
barges in, doesn't it?
Honestly, it just takes you over if you're not careful. So I just know it's not my job to quit having that reaction. Sometimes people think, well, I shouldn't have that reaction anymore. And I think, no, if you walk in the doctor's office and they hit your knee with a hammer, your leg's going to kick out no matter how mature you think you are. Mm-hmm. We will have those knee-jerk responses. That's a given. So it's not that it's our job to get rid of them, because we are a human being and we will have those responses. Our job is to wait for just a couple seconds, let me and God come up with a better answer than that, and then speak. So it says, be quick to listen, make sure you understand, slow to speak. It's like, right. If I give myself that 1 or 2 seconds to just be at prayer and ask God to help me with a better answer, God will always give me a better answer, because my spirit self wants good. And not just for me, my spirit self wants good for me and you and us. And so if I can pause just long enough for me and God and my spirit self to have that conversation, we will always come up with something better than my knee-jerk reaction, like literally every time. Mm-hmm. But I have to be asking. Jesus said, ask and it shall be given unto you. This is a great example. If I can feel myself being triggered, I'm literally asking God to help me find a better answer. And God, of course, will answer all prayer. So I will get a better answer. And God, almost always, what God does to help me get to that better answer is to remind me who it is that I'm actually talking to. So I get triggered by something somebody says, some argument, or I disagree, or who knows what. And see, in my mind, I turn that person into the enemy. But they're not the enemy. It might be a good friend of mine. It might be my wife. It might be somebody I work with that I care about. It might be my cat. They're not the enemy. It's not me against you. That's what my human self thinks. But my spirit self knows, no, I want good for me and you. And as soon as I think about God or my friend or my colleague or my cat and about how much I love them for 1 second, I will instantly come up with a better answer than my human knee-jerk answer. I will literally come up with a better thing to say, even if it's just, Glenn, my billing thing is wrong. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. How can I help? Not my knee-jerk answer, but literally, if I just see that person, think about how much I love that client, I will come up with that answer, or me and God will come up with that answer more perfectly, because that's what actually happens. And so if we want to be our best self, we can't deny that we have that human self, because we do, and that's part of what makes life good. But we also have to understand, but in a time of conflict, when that adrenaline kicks in, my human self is always going to play tag. And I can't stop that, but I can override it. I can make a different decision, but I have to consciously choose it, and I have to consciously ask for God's help, because God will always help when I ask. And God will remind me who I'm talking to and help me come up with a way better answer, like a loving answer, a real answer, an answer that serves me and them. And the great thing is that will always be a win-win, by which I mean on 2 levels. Back to the great commandment. God says, love me and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, see, if I turn to God for a better answer, and God blesses me and puts a better answer on my heart. See, me and God are now in the right relationship. And then I say that more perfect, loving thing to that person, and me and them are now in the right relationship. And we get, by just taking those 2 seconds, we get to fulfill both halves of the great commandment at the same time. I'm honoring God by how I talk to you.
So maybe one of the questions we can ask ourselves is, when you feel neurologically hijacked, because
that's a great way to say that. I love that.
25 milliseconds of adrenaline that's kicked in, which is your fight or flight response.
Right.
Because I've heard people say, after they calm down, hey, I'm really sorry about that. That just so you know, that really wasn't me.
Right.
I go, yeah, it probably wasn't. It was probably the rage person in you that was just trying to defend themselves from attack.
Right. Who thought they were being threatened and responded as if they were being threatened.
Yes.
Who now thinks this is me against you and I have to protect myself from you. Which, if I'm talking to my cat or my best friend or my colleague or my wife, that can't possibly be true.
It can't be true.
I know. It's crazy. It is literally a crazy thought.
Yeah.
And yet we let that thought, like you say, hijack us if we're not careful.
Yeah. So the key is, when you demonstrate this idea of pausing and then praying and then proceeding, you will probably 9.5 times out of 10 make that second choice instead of your first choice.
Right.
But will also just take work and discipline.
It does. And it's really important for people to hear this. You will get better and better at doing this. You'll get quicker and quicker at overriding it. You'll get better and better at remembering what's true, that you have options. You don't have to go with a knee-jerk reaction, and God will help you find a better response. You'll get better and better at remembering that. And you will still have that knee-jerk human response. Yeah. You always will. So it's not our job to get rid of that response. It's our job to just know it, see it happen, think, I could do that, or could ask God for a better answer, and then do that. Mm-hmm. So I don't get rid of it, I override it. It's so important to understand the difference. Yeah.
And I think that's critical that we leave that with that thought, just to let people know and give them the sense of relief that, yes, they will always have that first triggered thought.
Right, because it is literally in us. It's our primitive survival mechanism that if we think we're in danger, we fight or flight. And we literally couldn't get rid of that without...
It's our hardwiring, isn't it?
Cutting out part of our brain, right?
Yeah, but if we remember that we can pause, we can pray, we can then proceed, we will find ourselves in a much better right relationship with whoever it is we're talking to, and also with God.
And with God who adores that person, right?
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Great hour, Glenn. You know, this, every time we talk about TAG, and I love doing this, is always so enlightening, because your content in this book is so good. And if you have not had a chance to go through that book, I do recommend it. It is called TAG.
Well, actually, TAG, you're at the secret game that's destroying your marriage. That's my first TAG book. The second one is called Playing TAG, the world's most common game.
Right.
I mean that like literally. It's the most worldly way to have an interaction, and it's what we will do every single time if we're not literally choosing our spiritual self to override that worldly self.
Yeah. All right, Glenn. Thank you so much. drglennpickering.com is his website. That's all the time we have for today's show. I hope whatever is in front of you tonight, that you have a wonderful evening. And I pray as you lay your head on the pillow that you just know that God loves you. Have a great night, and God bless. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.